It's Friday, the 14th of January. Good morning, Europe. I'm Sarah Green. Thanks for joining us on Euronews. Our headlines this hour.
Warnings that the risk of war in Europe is the highest it's been in decades after a week of diplomatic talks fails to ease tensions over Ukraine. Britain's Prince Andrew is stripped of his military and royal titles as he fights allegations of sexual assault. And the body of David Sassoli, the late president of the European Parliament, lies in state in Rome ahead of his funeral later today.
No breakthrough. That's how a third round of diplomatic talks between NATO and Russia have concluded at the Organisation for Security and Cooperation in Europe in Vienna. Poland, which chaired the meeting, warned that Europe is at risk of plunging into war. The White House National Security Advisor said the risk of a Russian invasion of Ukraine was high.
We've now completed an intensive week of diplomacy in multiple formats. Russia raised its concerns, we raised our concerns, including the actions Russia has taken to undermine European security. We're prepared to continue with diplomacy to advance security and stability in the Euro-Atlantic. We're equally prepared if Russia chooses a different path.
The Russian Deputy Foreign Minister refused to rule out the possibility of sending military assets to Cuba and Venezuela if NATO doesn't stop military activities on Russia's doorstep.
The Russian president has spoken many times on this subject, in particular what the military actions should be within the Russian Navy if anything goes towards provoking Russia and the further enhancement of military pressure from the US side. We don't want this. Diplomats must negotiate.
Jamie Shea is a former NATO Deputy Assistant Secretary General. He says what happens next is up to Russia.
The ball is in Putin's court. Is he interested in a dialogue, in some kind of negotiation, or is all of this posturing on the Russian side to maximize unacceptable demands, not seek any solution, and then simply use a failure of talks which were doomed to fail in any way as a pretext to invade Ukraine?
Lithuania shares a border with Russia, and it says the threat of war is greater than at any time since 1945. Now it's preparing for the worst.
After the third unsuccessful Ukraine summit this week, the mood in Europe's diplomatic arena is downbeat. Russia warns of a crisis with unforeseeable consequences for Europe's security. And Poland, which is a NATO member, sits on the other side of the negotiating table, has a similar assessment of the situation. For 30 years, Europe would never have been as close to war as it is now. A strong statement. Poland apparently wants to use its recently assumed OSCE chairmanship to draw more attention to the ongoing war in its neighboring country, with the help of an upcoming visit by the chair to eastern Ukraine. Saber-rattling in the east, inflexibility in the west. Russia's demand to stop NATO's eastward expansion before Ukraine is apparently not being taken into consideration. Moscow sees the ever closer NATO military bases as aggression. And at the same time, the West sees the Russian troop deployments towards the Ukrainian border as aggression as well. And after 3 diplomatic summits, first in Geneva, then in Brussels, and finally in Vienna, the two sides have apparently not gotten much closer. However, one ray of hope remains. The door to diplomacy is still open, as both the Americans and the Russians affirm. With regard to the Ukraine issue, Europe must apparently prepare itself for slow diplomacy, based on a well-known recipe, saber-rattling and stubbornness on both sides, of what is at the very least an open door. Johannes Blechberger, Euronews, Vienna.
With Western leaders putting the ball back in Moscow's court, Euronews Russian analyst Galina Polinskaya says the country has warned it will take action if its proposals go unheeded.
Russia condemned the refusal of the US and NATO to accept its principal demands, calling the security talks unsuccessful. Vladimir Putin's spokesman Dmitry Peskov told journalists there were disagreements on issues fundamental for Russia and that it was bad Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Rybkov, who headed up the delegation at the US talks, said that discussions had so far run into a dead end. Moscow says it's now waiting for a written response from Washington and NATO to decide on its next move. Russia's permanent representative to the OSCE, Alexander Lukashevich, has warned that Moscow will take all necessary measures if its proposals remain unanswered. He says if the parties fail to agree on lines that can't be crossed, catastrophic consequences will ensue. But top Russian officials won't say exactly what those measures will be, adding that Russia has no plan to attack Ukraine. The final decision on the next step stays with the President Putin. Galina Polunskaya for Euronews.
Britain's Prince Andrew has been stripped of his honorary military titles and his royal patronages have been returned to the Queen. Earlier this week, a US judge ruled that a sexual assault case against the British royal could go ahead. In a statement, Buckingham Palace announced that the Duke of York, who denies the allegations, will defend his case as a private citizen and will not be undertaking any public duties. Royal commentator Richard Fitzwilliams told Euronews that the Queen had little choice but to distance herself and the monarchy from the scandal.
It was undoubtedly the right decision at the beginning of her Platinum Jubilee year, but also in response to some anger from veterans and also to a lengthy catalogue of what I can only describe as catastrophic mistakes by Andrew. All the options open to him, whether he ignores the court, which is in New York, whether he attempts a settlement, which could be seen partly as an admission of guilt if it can be negotiated, or if he were actually to take part in some form of court trial. All of these look bad for him, as does his behaviour and his choice of friends, including that grotesque interview on BBC Newsnight in November 2019.
Italian politicians joined ordinary citizens to pay respect to the European Parliament President David Sassoli, who died earlier this week and whose coffin was placed in Rome's town hall ahead of a state funeral. President Mattarella and Prime Minister Draghi, as well as the mayor of his hometown, paid homage to the politician.
Sassoli's political legacy is clear. Europe must be united and able to speak with one voice with regards to major international issues instead of hesitating like it has done in the past. Sassoli's Europe was all about that, but we still have to build up that idea of Europe. That's his legacy.
A heavy smoker, Sassoli was hospitalized in September due to pneumonia. Just after Christmas he was hospitalized again with a dysfunction of the immune system. His term ahead of the EU Parliament, which was meant to end this month, was marked by what many described as the human face of Europe.
Sassoli's manners were gentle and kind, but at the same time clear and defined. This could inspire a new form of communication in politics and a new way of doing politics. I believe that a more collective and kind leadership and a more inclusive one is the way forward, both for Italy and for other European countries.
David Sassoli's funeral service will take place on Friday in the Basilica of Santa Maria degli Angeli in the center of Rome.